So I have a confession to make. I watch reality TV shows. I understand that reality shows aren't really reality. They are carefully edited to make the show much more interesting than reality actually was. I get that, but I still watch. Now, listen, I don't watch the Kardashians or The Bachelor or Dancing with the Stars, but I love HGTV, especially Chip and Joanna. And my favorite TV show has to be Survivor. I've watched every season. People scheme, they lie, they cheat, they manipulate, they form alliances and sell out their friends, all in order to win $1 million. It definitely reminds me of real life. Today we pick up the story of Daniel with a real life episode of Survivor, Babylon style. It's an epic, surprising story that today I'll tell you from Daniel's perspective. Hello, I'm Daniel. I remember what happened like it was yesterday. I was just a young teenager when King Nebuchadnezzar conquered the kingdom of Judah and destroyed Jerusalem and took captive what they said were the strongest and the brightest young men back to his palace in Babylon. This included 3 of my friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and myself. And all of us captives, we stood in the same place. We ate the same food, and we were taught the same things. King Nebuchadnezzar was watching to see which one among us would emerge as the best of the best, the survivors. But you see, the prize was a high position working for the king, leading the captive kingdoms. If you won, you got to join the leadership team of the free world. Not only did you get a position and prestige, your position of power could provide protection for your own people. The stakes were high. But you see, if you displeased the king, you didn't get voted off the palace or out of Babylon. This king had a bad temper. And if you crossed him, if you disobeyed his instructions or made him mad, then he simply just killed you. This was a contest and a competition that none of us wanted to lose. We all stayed in the palace, and we were fed gourmet meals from the king's table. For us, it presented us with a major problem. It wasn't that the food didn't look or smell good. Man, it looked wonderful. Matter of fact, it looked awesome. But you see, as Hebrews had a very clear set of guidelines about what we were to eat and what we were to avoid. The food from the king's table was a clear violation of the guidelines that were given to us by God. You know, as I think back about it, there was no doubt that this was an intentional on the part of King Nebuchadnezzar. He knew what we were allowed to eat. He knew what we weren't allowed to eat. And he simply wanted to break down our traditions and beliefs and become our God. But for us, we all had the same rules. The table was set. The food we weren't supposed to eat was set before us. It looked good. It smelled great. But the problem was it was a sin. And before we knew it, everyone around us dug in. Many of my countrymen were feeding and feasting at the table of the king. It was a difficult situation for my friends and I. You see, to the natural mind, it made sense. God didn't want us to starve, right? And the reality, our countrymen, the people who were raised the same way we were, they were all doing it. For my friends and I, there was a lot on the line. Every other captive that was with us was eating the food. And in order to win this game that we couldn't afford to lose, we needed to eat. We absolutely didn't want to be the only ones not eating, but we also knew it would be a sin if we ate it. We had a choice. We could either eat the food that we knew that violated God's command, or we could take a stand for what we knew to be right. I decided that I know what God has told me to do. I know what is right. I don't care what anyone else says or does. I'm making a firm decision to obey God. I decided to do what I knew was right. I knew I had to obey and follow God's truth. It's so important. I decided before I was faced with this temptation. I was already sold out to God, and I wasn't about to willfully disobey him just to get a spot at his table. Now listen to me. This wasn't an act of rebellion on my part. I could have defiantly said I wasn't going to eat any of this food and acted like a spoiled brat. But listen to me, that's not what I did. In fact, I asked for permission from the chief that was over us. Come to think of it, it was an act of humility and righteousness. You see, it was the same heart that led me to the right decision, that led me to the right attitude. My first response, my initial attitude was, I'm going to do the right thing the right way. I could have gotten angry, but I didn't. I didn't have to be a jerk to do what was right. I didn't have to put other people down. I didn't have to talk about my countrymen who decided to do it. I simply did the right thing with the right attitude. You see, that day God taught me a great principle. When you do the right thing with the right attitude, people will respect you. Now, the reality is, even though I did what was right with what I thought was the right attitude, I honestly expected a fight on my hands. I expected the official to be completely against me. But you see, it wasn't my words that persuaded the official. Instead, God caused the official to show favor and sympathy towards me. Because I did the right thing with the right attitude, God worked on my behalf. I don't know what I expected to happen other than a fight. But I knew that the official had a problem on his hands. If he granted my request to eat a different diet, and my friends and I didn't look as strong and as healthy as the others, the king would be unhappy. And as I've already told you, this king wasn't the most reasonable guy. When the official told us he would have my head, he wasn't using a metaphor. He meant it literally. He wanted to grant my request, but it was a very significant risk on his part. And so I said to him, give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. As I look back on it, that was an incredibly wise statement. I said, no problem. Let's just try it out for 10 days and see what happens. I believe because I was making a stand and refused to follow the crowd and decided to honor God, that God gave me wisdom. The reality is I would much rather eat the king's choice food rather than vegetables. I mean, come on, they're vegetables. But I would rather eat I'd rather eat this rabbit food than be disobedient to God. So I said to the official, I said, give us 10 days. You'll be able to see how God has honored us. As I looked back, it was a bold and faith-filled statement. Everyone else was going to eat meat. Yet Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and I, we were going to have nothing but water and vegetables for a 10-day trial period. I mean, come on, what was I thinking? Was there really going to be a difference in 10 days? How much result did I expect to see in just 10 days? the king's official listened to me saying, don't worry about your head being cut off. Trust me. Listen, it was only God that could make that happen. I learned something valuable that day. When you stand alone, you're not standing alone. The God of heaven, the creator of the world, the one who loves you, stands with you. You see, when you stand with God, you are not in the minority. God works with you, in you, around you, and through you. And lo and behold, it worked. After eating only vegetables for 10 days, we looked better, more nourished, and more fit than the rest of everyone. God honored us because we obeyed him. You see, when you stand for what is right and you refuse to give in, God honors your obedience. When you stand alone against culture, remember, you aren't standing alone. You aren't sacrificing. You're not giving up anything. You're gaining a reward from God. You see, blessing follows obedience. For whatever reason, God gave us knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. I mean, God even gave me the ability to understand visions and dreams of all kinds. I remember at the end of the time that the king had set, the chief official presented all of us to King Nebuchadnezzar. And as the king talked with us, he said that he found none equal to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and myself. And so that day, we entered the king's service. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding that the king questioned us, he found us 10 times better. Not just a little bit better, but 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. You see, we did what was right in spite of what everyone else was doing. And we won. We were the wisest and the smartest. We were filled with wisdom and understanding. I've said it often, right wins. It may not win every battle, but it always wins the war. So do what's right. Honor God and obey God. Stand against culture. Refuse to give in to what everyone else is doing, because God honors right. And when you do right, God gives you the victory. But that victory may look a little bit different. You see, I remained there in captivity until the first year of King Cyrus. And I know what you're thinking. Hold on a second. I thought you said that God gave you the victory. What kind of victory is that? Shouldn't you have just said, and the king let you and your friends go back to your homeland? Maybe. But that's not what happened. I was captive for 70 years. And I faithfully served, even though my definition of victory looked a little bit different than God's definition of victory. I had to live in captivity. I didn't have a choice. But when we stand against the shifting tide of culture, when we stand for what is right, when we refuse to let everyone else is doing it govern our behavior, God gives us the courage to endure. It's an important lesson. You will stand when others fall. You will go on when others give up. You can face life's most challenging battles with joy and grace because God gives you confidence and courage. Some of you have found yourself captive in an argument that said everyone is doing it. You've done some stupid things. You've sinned against God because you want to fit in with the very people around you. You've let culture make your decisions instead of acting on what is right. It's time to change. Maybe you're thinking, okay, here it comes. I knew it. He's about to tell us everything that we're doing wrong. He's going to give us a list of everything that we can't do. He's going to make us throw away our TV, quit going to movies, and a whole bunch of other things. He's just mad about something. No, not me. Instead, I just want to ask, are you letting the world make your decisions? Or are you obeying God? Let me ask it another way. Are you currently doing something that you used to think was sin? The reality is it probably still is. You just got sucked into a new way of thinking because everyone is doing it. I want to pray for you today. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Maybe today you find yourself in a situation like Daniel and his friends. Surrounded by a culture that's telling you that it's okay to do the things that you know you shouldn't be doing. And maybe, unlike Daniel and his friends, you decided to give in because everybody else was doing it. Man, today could be the day that you come to God and say, I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry for being disobedient to you. If that's you, I want to pray for you right now. God, we come to you. God, knowing that we should do what's right. But God, too often we're influenced by what the world says. So God, today we ask your forgiveness for all the ways, God, where we should have done what's right, but instead we sided with what the world told us was right. God, we just ask that you would forgive us. God, help us take a stand when nobody else will. Lord, we praise you and we thank you for it. God, give us the courage to endure. God, even when it seems like we're not in the midst of a victory, God, may we be like Daniel and continue to faithfully serve. God, knowing that you've won the victory. Lord, we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.